A moment ago, they had no idea who I was. Their eyes moved over me, from my polished black shoes to my skin, the skin they thought didn't belong. One smug gesture, a cold smile, and as if they were following a script, they politely asked me to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't explain who I really was. Why should I? The real show hadn't started yet. Soon they would realize that this hotel, the one they so carefully guarded against me, was about to belong to me. Standing at the entrance of a luxurious hotel, I couldn't ignore how ridiculous the situation was. My suit fit me perfectly. My shoes shined like mirrors. In my pocket was the key to a world I had already conquered: wealth, success, recognition. Yet, despite all of that, an invisible wall stood in front of me. Not one made of stone or glass, but of human prejudice. A narrow way of thinking that refused to see past the color of my skin. I felt their eyes on me, measuring, judging, deciding. To them, I was just a black man who had clearly walked through the wrong door. In their world, I was an outsider, a mistake, something that didn't fit into their perfect picture of luxury. This place was supposed to be about prestige, comfort, and hospitality, yet the air was thick with tension. The staff was already looking at me like I didn't belong. And in that moment, when you feel like a stranger in someone else's world, the question isn't about how much money you have. It's about how long you can endure before something changes. I wasn't angry. What struck me was how quickly they judged me by my skin without knowing anything else about me. It didn't bother me. Money could open any door, but I had already learned that it couldn't erase human prejudice. I didn't need to prove myself to these people. My story was just beginning. As I stepped inside, each movement on the marble floor felt like a statement. The grand lobby with its golden chandeliers, elegant furniture, and flawless design was meant to impress. But all I felt was a chill, not from the air conditioning, but from the people. Here, luxury and arrogance walked hand in hand. My goal was simple: check in like any other guest. But as I walked toward the reception desk, I noticed the staff exchanging looks. At the desk stood the manager, a blond man with a rehearsed smile. He didn't even glance up before speaking. He already knew what he was going to say, and when he finally did look at me, his eyes said more than his words ever could. He scanned me, seeing my perfectly tailored suit, my polished shoes, then dismissing me as if none of it mattered. "I'm sorry, but we don't have any available rooms for you," he said, polite but firm. It wasn't the rejection that surprised me, but the certainty in his voice. He spoke as if this decision wasn't his own, as if a system, a long history of judgment and exclusion, was speaking through him. In places like this, luxury and arrogance always come together. His words were just the final act of a play I had already seen before. I could have told him my name, and everything would have changed instantly. They would have apologized, rushed to offer me the best suite, maybe even treated me with respect. But I didn't want to break their little performance. I wanted to see just how far they would go. A security guard, a tall man with a shaved head, stepped toward me. His face was blank, but his politeness barely hid his real message. He moved with a kind of insistence that made it clear: this wasn't a request. "Please leave the hotel," he said, his voice calm but final. I looked at him without saying a word. I had no desire to argue or explain myself. Their ignorance and arrogance were a lesson I would remember, but not one they deserved to understand. I turned and walked toward the exit. Each step on the marble floor echoed, as if marking the countdown to something inevitable. They had no idea how close they were to their world turning upside down. They only saw in me what they wanted to see. But their world was about to change. A few weeks had passed since that day. Back then, I had walked away without a word, but not without a plan. During that time, a strategy had formed in my mind. This wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity, it was about taking control of their world. The irony of life was that I had always been one step ahead of people who judged by appearances. Now I stood in front of the same hotel, in the same city, but with a different status. I was no longer just a guest. I was the new owner. As I headed toward my lawyer's office to sign the final documents, I felt a mix of emotions. But anger wasn't one of them. I had long since learned not to waste energy on that. What I felt was anticipation. This was the moment when insults turned. I wasn't here for revenge, at least not in the way they might expect. No childish games or petty pranks. My plan was deeper. I wanted them to destroy their own illusions, to let their pride be their downfall. Sitting in the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but smirk as I looked at the papers confirming my ownership of the hotel. It was done. The hotel was mine. And this was only the first step. After signing the documents, I returned to the hotel, not as a guest, but as an observer. The entire staff continued working, unaware of what was about to happen. To them, I was still invisible. My name had yet to be mentioned in their meetings, which gave me the perfect opportunity to watch them in their natural environment. When I met with the general manager, our conversation was exactly what I expected. Formal, controlled. He was a confident, slightly arrogant man who probably believed he had everything under control. "Our staff is stable and professional," he said, his voice full of pride. "We haven't had to let anyone go in a long time. Our turnover rate is minimal." I nodded, keeping a calm expression, but inside my certainty grew. They had no idea what was coming. Their world was on the edge of disaster, and they had no idea. I looked at each of them. The same blonde manager who had refused to give me a room. The security guard who had forced me out the door. They all went about their lives completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. As I walked down the stairs after the meeting, I stopped for a moment, thinking, should I act now, expose them all, and fire them in one quick move? Or should I let them live in their false sense of security for a little longer? My plan depended on one thing: patience. The day I decided to begin my little show came unexpectedly. I was walking down the hallway, glancing around the lobby when I saw him, the manager, the same blonde one. He was focused on his work, flipping through papers and checking a logbook. He didn't see me. I stood just a few feet away, but this time I wasn't invisible. I owned this building now, though only I knew it. His face was calm, unaware that his job, his future, was already in my hands. For a moment, I thought about how easy it would be to change everything right then. One word from me, and he'd lose his position. His confidence, his comfortable life, it would all come crashing down. But where's the fun in that? I wanted to watch them dig their own graves, to let their own actions lead them to their downfall. I wanted them to understand their mistake. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Smiling to myself, I turned and walked away. I had much bigger things to do. Today, I was walking into the same hotel, but it wasn't the same as when I left, feeling humiliated. Now I walked in with complete power. Everything had changed. This hotel was no longer the fortress that had once rejected me. Now it was mine, and I was ready to take control. They didn't even know they had already lost. From the moment I woke up, I could feel a certain tension, like the air had gotten heavier. Maybe it was just in my head, but knowing I was about to face the people who had looked down on me weeks ago gave me energy. On the outside, I was calm, cold even, but inside my resolve burned. The only question was, how would they react when they realized their world had shifted? Right before I stepped into the conference room, I paused. I took a deep breath, letting a small smile cross my lips. I was about to walk in without warning, no heads up, no chance for them to prepare. That was the whole point. I wanted them to feel like the ground was crumbling beneath them. When I entered the conference room, everyone was already seated. They didn't notice me at first. I chose a seat in the corner where I could watch without drawing attention. The manager, the same one who had denied me a room, stood at the front speaking confidently. He was going over the day's plans, giving instructions with the same arrogance he had shown when he judged me as not worthy weeks ago. I sat silently watching him. He had no idea his world had just collapsed. Then our eyes met. It was only for a second, but I saw it, the moment he recognized me. He froze, his words caught mid-sentence. First his face turned pale, then he quickly masked it with a professional look. "Who are you?" he asked. But he already knew. His voice was steady but cold. The entire room fell silent, all eyes shifting between us. If you were in Big Shaq's shoes, how would you respond? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. "I'm your new owner," I replied calmly with a small smile. Silence. The whole room went still. My voice was quiet, but its impact hit like an earthquake. I watched his emotions flickered across his face. Disbelief, shock, then fear. This was the moment everything changed. The employees glanced nervously between me and the manager. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a storm, when you realize there's nothing you can do to stop it. The manager opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. His breathing grew heavy, his face even paler. His eyes darted around the room. I could see it happening, the realization that all the power he had once held was gone. Everything he had built, the status he had relied on, was now working against him. He was just another employee now. And the most ironic part? He now answered to the very person he had dismissed. I stood up and walked toward the exit. The room remained frozen in shock. But this was only the beginning. I wasn't just here to take over, I was going to rebuild this place from the ground up. After I declared myself the owner, no one knew what was coming next. They probably expected immediate firings, chaos, drastic changes, but I wasn't interested in playing a predictable game. I had always been fascinated by what people do when they realize they're about to lose everything. And with each passing day, I became more aware of my power. I could destroy their confidence, tear down their illusions in an instant. But I chose a different path. It wasn't enough to rip off their masks. I wanted them to do it themselves, to watch as their own actions led them to ruin, to feel the full weight of their mistakes. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. One morning, as I got ready for the day, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Now I could finally watch them as they struggled under the weight of a new reality, revealing who they truly were. To start, I changed the work schedule. They were now assigned tasks they once thought were beneath them. I made them interact with lower-level employees as equals. This was my test to see how long their arrogance would last. A few weeks have passed since I put the new rules in place. Every day felt like a game of chess where my pieces were set, waiting for the right moment to strike. I studied them, watched their reactions, and saw how their confidence turned into doubt. The ones who used to look down on others now found themselves doing the very tasks they once refused. I observed the manager, always so sure of himself, now struggling. His pride started to crack as he was forced to negotiate with junior staff and handle small jobs he had never paid attention to before. Day by day, his face grew more tense. I could see the helplessness creeping in, but he still tried to act strong. The others were breaking too. The way they saw themselves as important, untouchable, was fading fast, like ice melting in the sun. They all looked lost, and that's what satisfied me the most. Conversations became shorter. No one smiled anymore. I wasn't just the hotel owner now, I had become the invisible force controlling their fears. One day while walking through the hotel, I saw the manager in the lobby. He looked tired, unsure, but he stepped forward. "We need to talk," he said. His voice trembled, though he tried to stay calm. About my role in the hotel, about how important my work is. I allowed myself a small smile and stopped in front of him. This was the moment I had been waiting for. As he spoke about his role, I knew his time was up. He was still clinging to the idea that he mattered, but his confidence was crumbling. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. His words sounded desperate, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. He wanted to prove that his work was essential, but even he knew his arguments were weak. Deep down, he wasn't thinking about the hotel, he was thinking about himself, about how to keep his place under me. When he finished, I smiled again. It wasn't a mocking smile, just a calm, powerful one. "I remember you," I said, looking him in the eye. "I remember the day you kicked me out of here." "Do you?" His face turned pale. Fear flashed across his eyes. He realized then that his words, his efforts to seem important, meant nothing. He had nothing left to say. Silence surrounded us. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Everything he had built, his arrogance, his fake importance, collapsed right in front of him. His role, his mask, all of it was gone. He understood that he no longer controlled the situation. I was the one deciding his fate now. But this was only the beginning. Every day in this hotel felt like a chess match where I could predict their moves and break their strategies apart. They saw me as just the owner, someone who stayed in the shadows. But their true selves, their lies, their games, they were starting to show. From the moment I stepped into this hotel as its master, I knew patience was the key to uncovering them. So I made small changes, adjusting schedules, giving extra tasks, shifting responsibilities. To them, these were just ordinary changes, but to me, this was a test. I was weaving a web, carefully planning each step. I wanted to see how far they would go to hold onto their positions. It's strange how people so used to power start losing their balance when the world around them shifts. That's when you see who they really are. Lies and arrogance always lead to downfall, and I was ready to watch them destroy themselves. With each new task, I saw their reactions change. At first, they were just annoyed. Why should these changes affect them? But then I noticed the cracks forming. Some started covering up mistakes. Others hid their weaknesses. Some even betrayed their coworkers just to stay ahead. I sat in my office watching as tension grew among them. For years, they built their careers on deception and false confidence. But now the rules have changed. Their old tricks didn't work anymore. One employee lied about finishing a task, another sabotaged their teammate, someone else blamed others for their failures. One day, I overheard a conversation between two employees. "I can't finish this on time, but if you help me, I'll tell management it was all your work," one of them whispered. The other smirked. "You want me to do your job?" "No way. I'll just tell them you messed everything up." That moment told me everything I needed to know. They were willing to betray each other to save themselves. Their masks were slipping. Their true nature was showing. At the end of the day, I called a meeting in the large conference room. No one knew why, but they all felt the tension. I could see it in their eyes. Some exchanged nervous glances. Others tried to look calm, but they all knew something was coming. Once everyone was gathered, I stood before them, letting silence fill the room. It was heavy, full of unspoken truths. I slowly looked at each of them. "Today, I want to talk about how your lies aren't just hurting this hotel," I said, my voice steady. "They're destroying you too." I let my words sink in before continuing. For the past few weeks, I've been watching, and do you know what I've seen? Lies. Lies to each other, lies to yourselves, lies to me. Each of you built your career on deceiving someone else, and today I'm here to show you where that's led. I turned on the screen behind me. Evidence appeared: emails, security footage, documents. Proof of every scheme, every betrayal, every cover-up. And now there was nowhere left to hide. Their faces turned pale as they stared at the evidence, realizing there was nowhere left to hide. Their lies were no longer a secret. I paused the video and looked at them again. "Your schemes have destroyed you," I said. "You thought you could hide behind your deceit, but now that's no longer possible." The look on their faces was pure despair. They knew the game was over. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was the moment they realized their entire lives, built on lies and manipulation, had fallen apart. Every step I took in this hotel was planned, each one bringing me closer to my goal. The people who once looked down on me were now trapped in their own mess, like flies caught in a web. But I wasn't finished yet. Their lies and prejudice ran too deep. For them, deception wasn't just a habit, it was a way of life. I knew that exposing them wasn't enough. They had to face the consequences of their actions, not in some distant way, but in a personal, undeniable reality. I started making changes in the hotel, slowly at first, almost unnoticeably. Some employees lost their privileges while others were given new opportunities. The new staff I hired was mostly black. People who had been overlooked now had the chance to lead those who once thought they were superior. Each day I watched the old staff struggle to adjust. They resisted, clinging to their positions, but deep down they knew it was useless. Their world was crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I remember the day one of the old managers, the same one who once refused to give me a room, finally faced his new reality. I walked into the hotel lobby and saw him behind the reception desk, nervously shuffling papers. His face was tense, his hands slightly shaking. The man who once felt so powerful was now stuck doing the simplest tasks, the ones he had always looked down on. I stepped closer and watched. At that moment, a family walked up to the desk, a mother, a father, and their two children. They were black. The manager saw them and instantly turned pale. It wasn't just recognition, it was fear. He realized that now he had to serve the very people he once rejected, the ones he thought were beneath him. "Good afternoon," he said, but his voice was weak and shaky. The father nodded politely. "We booked a room for a week. We'd like to check in." The manager gave a stiff nod and started the check-in process, trying to hide his discomfort. His hands moved slowly over the keyboard and his face showed complete defeat. I could see him trembling, struggling with what was happening. The man who once looked down on me was now forced to humble himself before those he once scorned. I didn't step in. I simply observed. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I watched his pride break down, his prejudice shatter right in front of me. When the check-in was complete and the family walked away, I approached the manager. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor, as if he wanted to disappear, to escape this situation that was tearing apart everything he believed about himself and the world. "How does it feel?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped, his face pale as if he had no strength left. "It's just a job," he mumbled, trying to sound unaffected. But I wasn't going to let him run from the truth. "You once denied me a room," I reminded him. "And today, you serve the people you despised. How does that feel?" Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were filled with fear and humiliation, not just fear of his new boss, but fear of what he had become. He realized that everything he had once believed in had led him to this moment. There was no escape. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and walked away. He needed time to process what had happened. This wasn't the end, but it was a turning point. I knew that the old ways would never return. Each employee who once believed they were superior had faced their own reckoning. I watched as their world collapsed, as their lies and prejudice consumed them from the inside. But this wasn't about revenge, it was about change. They needed more than just to recognize their mistakes. They needed to feel their old world slipping away beneath them. Today was important. I had gathered everyone, the very people who once discriminated against me, who once thought they were better because of their false beliefs. But now their status has changed. I gave them a choice. They could take compensation and walk away, leaving this chapter of their lives behind. Or they could stay, but under entirely new rules. I knew some wouldn't be able to handle it. That didn't concern me. Those who stayed would have to change completely. My emotions were mixed. This wasn't a triumph. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. It felt like I was finally closing a chapter of my life. Everything that happened here wasn't just a lesson for them, it was a lesson for me. I stood in the conference room, looking at the people who had once been the face of discrimination and prejudice in this hotel. Their faces were grim. Many had already accepted that their power was gone forever. They were no longer in control. Now, everything depended on me. "Today you stand before a choice," I said, watching their reactions. "You have two choices. You can leave now with fair compensation and forget this hotel like a bad dream. Or you can stay and keep working, but under new rules. If you stay, you must accept the changes and follow the conditions I set." Some employees immediately lowered their eyes, nervously shuffling the papers in front of them. They already knew they wouldn't survive in this new system. They had decided to leave. Others, the ones with nothing left to lose, looked at me with uncertainty but also understanding. They knew their options were limited. If you choose to leave, you'll get fair compensation, I continued. But if you stay, you must change everything, your attitude, your work ethic, even how you see the world. One of the old managers, the same one who once refused me service, raised his hand. Fear and desperation filled his face. "And what happens if we leave?" he asked, his voice shaking. I looked him straight in the eye and answered calmly, "You'll start over. No special privileges, but you'll have the chance to rethink your life." His face darkened. He knew the truth. His old life had been built on lies and arrogance. And now he would have to face a new reality. The last day arrived. Some employees had packed their things and left. They couldn't handle the changes. They refused to accept the new order. Those who stayed were slowly adjusting to a reality where they no longer had a false sense of superiority. As I walked into the hotel lobby, I saw the manager standing near the exit. His shoulders slumped. He looked defeated. This was the same man who once refused me a room, without even bothering to know who I was. Now he stood there, fully aware that everything had changed. I approached him and stopped beside him. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "You never even tried to know who I was," I said calmly. He didn't answer. His face remained blank, but his eyes were empty. This was a man who finally realized his entire life had been built on false beliefs. Now he had nothing left to hold on to. He gave a small nod, still not looking up, and walked out the door. I watched him go, knowing this was inevitable. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel satisfied. It was simply the end. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to share it with your family and friends. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.